Hi again, Laura. Oh my God.
Just couldn't stay away from this topic. We've got time. We
I
wanted
know.
to
We're like, oh my God, we've
explore.
got to go to a meeting, but we also want to really, on the back of the last episode, guys, and I'm going to do an intro here, then I'm going to defer to my very highly educated colleague about how it all works.
Perfect.
We're going to
Yeah.
talk about swapping SDA providers. So, again, many, many times a month, weekly, sometimes daily, but certainly weekly, we get a call or an email or inquiry. Someone says, what does it take for me to leave my SDA provider and come to you? It's called a provider switch. And it's a fairly standardized process
Yeah.
that happens all the time, all over the industry.
Yeah.
So now, but this is something that Lauren has a lot more technical expertise in than I do. I wouldn't dare to say I knew a lot about the intricacies of it. I can talk to it at a very high level. But Lauren's done the work, and she's worked with that team and trains the team and really understands the process. She's what you might even call an expert about how to transition providers smoothly in a fashion that you, as an owner, you minimize and really reduce down, ideally to zero, the time between the provider changeover to minimize any potential revenue loss. And
Yes.
that's the game. That's where you really need to know your knitting to get that
Yeah.
right, to make
Yeah.
sure that you as a landlord are protected with any gap in revenue. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Lauren, provider switches. What
Provider.
are Why do people do it?
Okay, a provider switch is essentially a property that is enrolled with another provider, whether it's tenanted or vacant or partially tenanted, changing its enrollment to a different provider. And so, therefore, the NDAS claims come through to a different provider and the tenants have an agreement with the new provider. And what's really important there is that usually people are coming to us because they've had an issue or something's not working. And so the goal there is to smooth out that process and to ensure that the investment returns are continued during that transition. So the biggest risk I think that people face here, and that we've seen unfortunately, a fair bit in the last 12 months with lots of provider switches happening due to market failure and whatnot, is that when you haven't operationally mapped out the best path for this to happen and really, really stick to a timeline and set communication pieces and set dates of unenrollment and re-enrollment, there can be a gap in claiming. And we have unfortunately seen it a fair bit because of the complexities of a couple of provider switches that tried to happen and then unfortunately failed last year. And it's really left owners with, I had one the other day, he's $140,000 out of pocket. And because that paperwork and that operational system didn't support the provider switch
Yeah,
very well, the NDIS is not paying those
yeah.
claims for a 9-month period because the paperwork wasn't done properly.
That was after the NDISP Sigma
It
fiasco,
was.
right?
Yeah, yeah, that was the
We
example.
can, we can mention those names because they're public domain. Once again, it's known. NDISP was a national provider, quite a big one. They were deregistered.
You registered, yeah.
All the properties were unenrolled by the agency, and they all moved across to Sigma.
Yep,
Most of them moved across to Sigma. And several months later, Sigma was also deregistered, and all the properties unenrolled there as well. And it
yep,
was a fiasco. Paperwork was missing all over the place. It
yep.
was
People didn't
through
have their
through through
certification
through no
document.
fault of owners, through no fault of tenants, through no fault of any other SEA providers like us who tried to then pick up some of the pieces and support the owners. Through no fault of any of those people, it was a fiasco. But
Yep,
the person left holding the can ultimately is the investor carrying the debt.
yes,
And
yeah,
there's been some tremendous examples of
yeah,
bad switches. So you mentioned that's an example of market failure.
yep.
Why else do landlords choose to switch SDA providers?
Um, unhappy with their current service delivery,
Mhm,
or quite often it's a challenge around vacancy. So,
mhm,
their existing provider might not be able to fill the vacancy, and so they're looking for a
mhm.
fresh set of eyes, a fresh
Yep,
marketing team to fill that vacancy. And so it's a matter of giving it to another provider to give it a go.
yep.
Quite often, it's just normal market movement,
Mhm.
where, if I was with LJ Hooker and, I didn't like my property manager, or, I'd had a whole lot of trouble with my tenant and that tenant now vacated, just to think, okay, I'm going to have a fresh start. So it can be lots of really normal reasons. But what we wanted to unpack today, and this is for everyone to use, and it's something that I've been talking with some colleagues in the industry about too, is how do we do this really efficiently? If somebody's leaving our portfolio and going to another SDA provider, what do we need to provide to make sure that we're still supporting that owner to have a smooth
Right.
transition and the
Ab ab
tenant to stay?
Right, and look, we get emails and calls from landlords saying, "I want to switch from DHS to someone else," and we
Yep,
go, "No problem, sir. No problem, ma'am.
this is
This is
what we
what you
do.
need, and we will
Yep,
support that transition, and we won't be obstructionist in any way." Right,
no,
and it's that's that you've got to have a mature commercial attitude about it.
yep,
And sometimes when we go to other providers and notify them that the landlord wishes to switch to us, we get a bit of attitude, we get a bit of chewed sometimes,
Look,
um, but
I
not all
think
the time. Not all the time.
if we can take the attitude out of it, a lot of the time it's just lack of systems to support them to provide what we need for a
Yeah,
smooth transition.
back
So
to those operational systems we discussed in the last episode again. Yeah,
sometimes we're searching for documents that they don't have or they can't find, or, documents that weren't put in place with the right dates on them,
yep.
or, rental ledgers that aren't in order. So it is actually, again, it's down to operational systems. This is why I wanted to unpack it.
And
So
everything's got to be so squeaky clean. Like the agency, if your paperwork is out by a full stop, it's going to get sent back as rejected, right?
yep,
It's got to be tight. And so if your provider's operational systems are not tight, this comes back to you get what you pay for conversation from the last
yeah,
episode. If you haven't
yeah,
watched it, go
yeah,
back and check it out.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but
So
but the good systems support this kind of activity as well.
yes, yeah. So look, what I wanted to run through is just and I won't go into real detail because we've got an excellent team that are much, much better at the nuts and bolts of it. But I just wanted to do a bit of a high level view of what's involved in a provider switch, so that, I guess people can see how to reduce their risk in something not quite being done right, because the risk is if you've got tenants in place and a provider switch goes awry, is that you lose the income in between. And the NDAs are unfortunately very, very black and white about it. They will not pay for claims during a period if the paperwork dates don't align. And so we want to try and minimize that risk as much as possible with any provider switch that we engage in. So, in saying that,
So that's the what and the why. How?
how? Yeah. So let's assume, Dave, that you're a landlord and you're swapping from one provider to the other just because you felt like it. And you've got two tenants in place. And so you just really want to make sure that the tenants stay stable and that your claims continue. The
That sounds like precisely what I'd want. Yep.
pretty accurate, right? So the first thing that we do is have that conversation with you, make sure that we're aligned in terms of what you want to achieve with us, what service we do deliver, and that we can actually service your property in terms of location. And then we want to understand which provider you're coming from so that we can have contact with that provider and begin the transition process. So once we've unpacked all of that, we've got some documentation in place with the landlord to confirm us as their SDA provider. We would actually go straight to the NDIS and let them know of our intention to
Now,
enroll.
is that a standardized form? Is that just an email? Do I just email you and say, hey, this is what I'd like to do? I email my current provider and say, I'd like to leave you and appoint DHS or XYZ provider. Is that all I need, or is there a form to do?
There's a couple of steps. So, from your perspective as the landlord, you would need to advise your current provider that you're wanting them to unenroll as of a certain date.
Mhm.
Now, you might have some contractual obligations depending on what you've signed with your existing provider that you need to accommodate.
Mhm.
And
That's a really good point. Every SDA provider has their own service agreement with and their own contracts with their landlords.
yes,
Some of them are very commercial and permissive, and you can sort of enter and exit these arrangements. And some of them are very restrictive. We've seen some really terrible SDA provider contracts with landlords. Like
yep,
some of these ones have locked landlords into a provider for 20 years with no exit clauses, right?
Yeah,
Really,
yeah.
really, really
And look, they'll
horrible,
fade
right?
out. They'll fade out of the market. I think landlords are now aware that being locked into a specialized
Not good.
niche market with a
Not good.
provider for 20 years is risky
Yep.
business. But look, all we can do is encourage you to explore your termination clauses. If there's any sort of breaches or lack of service delivery or
Yep.
performance indicators that they haven't met, then it's as simple as per clause XYZ, I'm going to terminate this contract, and you move forward.
And if
And
there's
look,
no clause, then it's a request. You say, "Listen, I get that I'm under contract and I'm not happy. I'd like to leave. I'd like to do it friendly, please." Right? You
yeah,
can also
yeah,
just make that request.
yeah, yeah. So as a landlord, you need to do that. And from there, you also request a contact person from that existing SDA provider to, forward over to your new provider so that we can request, rental ledgers and portfolio information. So once that's done, the clock starts ticking. So your provider then has a certain amount of time to unenroll your property for you. And look, I won't get into exact date lines because it does depend what contract you're in and termination clauses. So, but once that clock starts ticking and you've sent them the termination email and requested unenrollment, what can happen there is if they don't respond, for whatever reason, the NDIS can, at a certain point in time, you can request that they unenroll it for you. And then there's a little date line there that we follow. So I think the whole date line is
So
about
there's a
28
couple of
days.
streams here. So there's a couple of streams like you notify your existing provider you'd like to switch providers. All things going well, everyone agrees, certain times you hit and they click unenroll on the portal, or they
Yep.
kind of don't
So,
do that, right?
mhm,
And you as the landlord can go to the agency and request on a certain date it's unenrolled, and the
that's
agency will
exactly
do that
right.
for you. But all that's
Yes.
going to be cool. All that should be supported and coordinated by the new provider, and advice given along the way by the new
Yep.
provider.
Yep. So we would
Excuse me.
send you an email with all that information with steps for you to complete and steps for us to complete. The steps that we complete is the email to the enrolment team with an intention to enroll or transition. And once that unenrollment date hits, we'd submit our enrolment into the portal, having collected all of the enrolment documentation from you or your existing provider to coordinate and lodge.
Mhm.
Now, what is a bit of a nuance in the industry and that I think we saw a lot of over the last 12 months is that finding all of those documents and the list the NDIS require has gotten longer over time. Is that if your property was originally enrolled, say 3 years ago, you might not now have all of the documents you require to enroll it correctly today. So there is often a bit of back and forth. There's
Mm.
usually a fair bit of collaboration between yourselves, your certifier, possibly your builder, and your existing SDA provider to coordinate all those documents and make sure in today's enrolment we can actually re-enroll it properly. Sometimes, especially for properties built pre 2021, there is a recertification required
Mm.
because the NDIS now require sort of different certification documentation.
Is that a desktop certification looking at plans or a physical certification by a certifier?
Oh, that is a not a me question.
Hmm.
I actually think that it might be a visit.
Okay.
Yeah, we know a couple of certifiers that were involved in quite a few of these where upon re-enrollment, a certifier had to be engaged to go out and recertify the properties under their new documentation. I believe that they went out, but that is something that I can't be 100% sure on.
Look,
Um,
I think in a situation like that, it's just prudent to assume the worst, right? Assume that you need to then engage a certifier who's like an SDA certifier, not just your regular town plan type person. Site visit, entry notices,
yeah,
inspect the property, tape measures, the whole bit,
yeah, yeah.
level bubbles and angles and degrees of fall and things like that. It's all going to have
Yeah,
to get redone. Because even though, if you've done more than 5 seconds around as built plans and construction sites, you know that as built isn't always as built.
yeah,
You have
yeah,
your as built plan stamped by the council and certified. Then you go on site, and if the fall on the driveway is 1 degree too high, then it's a fail,
that's
and
right.
that's how that works.
Yeah, yeah. So look, I think there's quite a few certifiers out there now that know that this service has to be part of their offering, because there's quite a few properties that are getting caught up in that, and that it's a 2 to 3 grand, I think, to go and have it recertified. But what
Hmm.
it means is that your payments will continue, so it's well worth doing. So once all of that's done and we're able to enroll your property, during that sort of period, and we do sort of run the timeline side by side, is that as your new provider, we would get our heads around your tenant stakeholder group, and engage with them to have new lease agreements and service agreements signed. And that's really a relationship building opportunity. It's a part that we love doing, is going out to a new house and meeting the tenants and seeing what's working for them, what's not, any sort of maintenance updates that we need to be across, and just considering, their lease agreement that was and their lease agreement that will be, and anything that we need to consider. Sometimes they've negotiated certain extras to be included that we need to be across. So there's always a conversation to unpack that and really understand what these tenants require, and what works for them. So parallel to the enrollment is the tenancy onboarding, and what's really got to align is the enrollment date, the service agreement start date, and the lease dates. So as a new SDA provider, we can only claim SDA income from the date of date of the enrollment moving forward. If your property comes to us and it's got SDA arrears, that responsibility still sits with your exiting provider. So, I was talking to an owner the other day about it. They've got about $100,000 outstanding with their existing SDA provider and looking to switch to sort of stop the bleeding. Unfortunately, he thought that we could claim all of the existing
Yeah.
outstanding SDA arrears. We can follow and chase RRC arrears that weren't from when we were the provider. That's fine,
Yeah.
like a regular real estate
That's
agent.
a,
We
that's a
chase
tenant
rental
payment,
arrears.
not an NDS payment, right? So
That's
that's
right.
different things.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so any rental arrears from the tenant we can chase, even if they're pre our service date start. But SDA arrears has to be chased by the provider the property was enrolled with during those service dates. So you may still end up with a relationship with that provider, if there's arrears to chase, and that is up to them to follow up.
But This
Um,
this all this all goes into the big melting pot of why an owner is choosing to exit providers in the first place, right? If there's a
Usually,
persistent bleed that's not stopped of revenue, it's like, okay, I've got to draw a line in the sand here. From this date, I'm moving to a new provider, and hopefully we can stop that bleed of funds.
hmm
And then, like you've just said, Lauren, you're going to still have to then chase that other provider through whatever means and processes, whether it's a QCAT or VCAT or wherever it is, or laws or debt
yeah.
recovery services or wherever it is. But that's not something your new provider can support you with.
No, we can help you understand it and support you with any experience we have to contact certain departments,
Yeah.
or processes that we think they need to be responsible for.
But that's just
um
literally pointing in the right direction. So you need to talk to this person next, and we can't be. It's
it's
like
more
it's like trying
education.
to it's like trying to chase a refund from a plumber you've just engaged for some shoddy work the last one did for you, right?
It's a little bit like that. Yeah,
And you
yeah.
can't ask the new guy to sort of chase the last guy for you, right?
Yeah, we do know the framework in which you can have those problems
Yeah,
addressed,
yeah.
and who you can go to, which we always share. But at the end of the day, it's something that we've tried to assist claiming, and it's just a flat no. The NDIS's date timeline always has to match up. So like I
'Cause,
said
you're
before,
not the provider, and even if you just use the example in provider land, if you're an occupational therapist, it's not your job to chase up claims from the last occupational therapist for your client, right?
yeah,
It's just not. That's not how it works, and the agency won't engage with you because you're not the person who provided the service. They're
yeah,
not allowed to engage with you. It's
that's right.
it's there's barriers,
Process
right?
summon. Yeah. So look, once all of that's done, that's the big chunky, clunky, slow, and unfortunately a bit like herding cats, both on the NDIS side, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved in making all of those things work. But once that's done, essentially, and your claims are in place, and participants' service agreements are working, and endorsements are in, then claiming should just continue as per normal. If there's any issues there with a participant's plan or a review that needs to happen, then your new provider would be responsible for doing that with the tenant stakeholders. So look, once all of that's done, your provider switch is in place and you carry on with your new provider. Happy days.
All right. So we did the what, the why, the how.
Yep.
What are the risks and pitfalls? We discussed a few. We talked about there's potentially, if it's a certain age of the building, you might need to get recertified.
Yep.
We talked about aligning dates of enrolment and service agreements, is that they all need to line up on the same date so that the transition is effective from a single date, not a spread
Yep.
across months.
Yep.
We spoke about the capacity for the new provider to chase arrears or lack of capacity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other risks and pitfalls with switching providers?
Look, I think the biggest risk here, or at least as a timeline of risk that is realistic, is that getting those new claims in place when there's a provider switch happening usually takes a fair bit of administration on the NDIS side, and so there can be, a 2 to 3 month gap where you don't get paid, but you will get back paid to that date.
Is
So
it
you've
that big? Is it 2 to 3 months? It's going to be that large on
it
the NPS
can
side?
be. It can be. And it's usually when there's like a complex dovetail to coordinate or,
But
you
that's the
know,
complex side. What's like a fairly, if your property's fairly vanilla as far as these things go, and the stakeholder universe is fairly tight, like what's a reasonable timeline to expect the gap in payment with your back
si-
pay?
I would say 6 weeks is probably
Okay.
the average. Yeah. Yeah. And that's because it's a new claim. So even when a property is vacant and it's enrolled and everything's hunky dory, and then a tenant comes in a couple of weeks later, even those first claims, we suggest to owners it'll be 6 to 8 weeks before your first SDA claim will hit. And that will be for that 6 to 8 week chunk of time. And then we claim weekly from there. So, it is similar to that. But usually when there's a dovetail from one provider to the other and, endorsements and service agreements to line up, it can just take a little bit longer. So it's important to consider that with your finances and make sure you're prepared for it.
That's a good
Yeah.
point. Now, look, I suppose this is all good, right? So I think that captures pretty well the why and the how and the risks and the why you will want to do an SDA provider switch.
Mm.
And I think it's also important to touch that sometimes people come to us and the grievance and the reason for them wanting to switch providers is something that's inherent with the business and the industry, and all SDA providers experience the same. You spoke about a 6 weeks to maybe 3 months delay in claiming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Any SDA provider is going to run up against that. So if you're
Yeah.
switching providers because you're really unhappy with your current provider around NDIS payment timelines, if everything's been done correctly and it's an NDIS problem and you're coming to us saying, I want to do it better, we're probably going to deliver the same service, right? And you're going to have the same frustrations. So
That's right.
it's
Yeah.
important for you as an owner. The reason you're switching has to be something that's within the control of an SDA provider to mitigate,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Now, NDIS is a massive, complex animal. If you look in the newspaper any day of the week, there's some sort of NDIS story and some
Always.
kind of gone wrong or a thing or a blah, and it's expensive and slow. And we get the same thing, right? And so I think it's important for us that we will, again, if someone comes to us, we'd love your business, of course, but we will be straight and say, look, it sounds
Yeah.
like your provider's doing a good job in the
Everything they
circumstance.
can. Yeah.
And
Yep.
again, we're happy for you to come to us. We'll take the business, but you need to know you're probably not going to get a different result coming to us for that particular reason. If
Mm.
if
Yeah.
it's an agency related issue.
Yeah, no, and we do talk through that. So this is why it's always really important to find out what the issue is,
Mhm.
because if we can't do any better, or that's the industry average,
Right.
we're not going to walk into there and be like, oh yeah, it's all peaches and cream,
That's
like
right.
we're going
So
to
that again,
solve.
going back to our last episode, the one immediately prior to this, we speak about what SDA investment is and what you should expect. And this is not general real estate. The tenant doesn't move in and you get
No,
paid rent the next fortnight.
no,
That's not SDA investment, right? So
yeah.
this
Usually,
setting of expectations is important.
Yeah, and look, we're banging on about operational systems to support a important process to reduce risk for an owner. That's one part of it. The SDA provider you're switching to must be able to prove they've got operational experience and expertise in getting the outcomes right. We're not going to get it right every time, but because we've got a framework and been through it a lot. We've got experience, we've got runs on the board, we've got, mistakes we made and learnt from and implemented new things to make it smoother. I think that's really important. There'll be more challenges along the way where we learn more through things that don't go well. But I think one of the biggest problems that comes along with that is not like, oh, I didn't get paid for 6 weeks, where we would say, well, it's going to be the same when you come to us, but it's the communication about that and the transparency about that comes with each provider. So quite often it's a combination of, I didn't get XYZ financial outcome, but I've also had zero communication about it and I'm feeling really in the dark. What can you guys do to
Yep.
get the finances up in order, and what systems and resources do you have to do that,
Yep.
but how
And
are you
keep
going
me
to
informed.
communicate with
Yeah.
me about it?
Yep.
And look, I think in this day and age, we all communicate so much. And trying to be a service
Thanks.
provider communicating out to clients, whether they're tenants or owners or stakeholders, is heavy duty. But as a service provider trying to be that communicator, it's really important for us to deliver a very good customer service experience, which, we've gone through a whole lot of swings and roundabouts, in particular in the last 18 months, in trying to improve our
Yeah.
communication out to owners and to
Yep.
tenants. And we haven't done a great job all the time. We've done a terrible job sometimes, that are excellent job other times.
Yep. Yeah.
But I
That's
think
fair.
the thing is that, having a provider that is aware of where they're at and can realistically set expectations and then meet them
True. I
is
I
really.
think it's equally important to acknowledge where you're not doing well as it is to
Yeah,
sort of highlight where you are doing well.
yeah,
And you're right. Some of our communication in the last little while has been terrible. Some of it,
yeah,
because
yeah. We've
it's
had
it's
terrible
hard.
days.
There's a
Yeah,
lot to do. There's a
yeah,
lot to handle, and there's hundreds of properties and hundreds of participants and tenants and hundreds of different sets of expectations and
yeah.
thousands of people involved in the stakeholder universe. And so
That's right.
it's
That's right. So no one's perfect at it, but I think that is one of the biggest challenges I think that owners experience is financial clarity. They don't have it.
Mm.
And then trying to get communication and understand what's actually happening. It has been historically an issue for a lot of SDA providers. So, like in terms of operational systems around that, I know that we've recently implemented some automations in our system that give owners updates as soon as a claim's rejected, and it pushes it out to our team to say, this claim's just been rejected, figure it out why, lodge it with the commission, oh, not the commission, lodge it with the claims team
Yep.
and get onto it, so it's
Oh,
like alerting something's wrong straight away, letting the owner know straight away, and then letting them
right,
know that
right.
Steve's
And
onto it.
there's some good feedback on that. We're starting to get some compliments about that kind of stuff, which is great.
Yeah, and the milestones, like I think that's a lot of our owners are so happy just to know that someone's working on it. And
Yeah.
so within our system, there's always truckloads of communication internally and externally with stakeholders, but a lot of the time we were missing pushing that out to owners. So now we've got parts of our system, we push a button and go, okay, we've reached this milestone. We're now at this stage and we're moving there. And that now communicates out to our owners what's happening. And it's not a 30-minute phone call, which I'm sure we'd all love to have. I could go for plenty of wines with lots of our owners and have a great old time. But it is that consistent transparency and insight as to what's happening and what we're working on that I think is really, really valuable to owners. So
Mm.
yeah, we're working on doing more of that, but at the moment, I think the insight into the claiming for owners is going really well, and it's an operational system I think that's been very successful thus far.
Agreed. All right.
Mm,
Well, that's how to switch SDA providers,
yep,
why, how, the risks, what
yep,
it is,
yep,
some background about the importance again of these operational systems to facilitate these transitions, and
uh-huh,
make hopefully you choosing to come to Disability Housing Solutions or your next SDA provider a better experience than you're currently
yep,
getting. So I think
yep.
that should do it. That's about half an hour. That just goes so quick.
It does. It does. Yeah, I know.
So
Time
next
flies
time,
when
let's commit to have an interesting guest, not just us banging on about different things. Or we could wax lyrical for days, I'm sure. But
sure.
we will. There's a few ideas I've got, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too early. But we'll bring some interesting people on. I'm looking forward to a
Yeah.
great year of good conversations this year in the podcast. Actually, it's going to be good.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I do love these chats, and I hope that everyone's enjoying it just as much as we do.
All right. Thanks,
All
mate.
right. Thanks,
Talk next
Dave.
time.
See you
Bye.
soon.